Here's something that I'm not particularly proud of. I've had friends who were going to make it big in an IPO, yet I was secretly hoping that they would fail. I'd have other friends become partners at big investment banks, yet secretly I'd be saying to myself, well, they're probably a lousy husband. Why did I act like such a loser? 2 words: envy and jealousy. And if you're always comparing yourself to others, it can cause a lot of problems.
If I think that I'm better than you, that's comparative mind and that's misery. And if I think that I'm less than you, that's comparative mind and that's misery.
That's Joe Hudson, a leadership coach for executives and investors in Silicon Valley, a world that is rife with envy and comparison. But instead of trying to overcome envy, it's more productive to listen to see what it says about your self-worth and your own desires.
Envy is pointing to something that you want. You're not envious of the guy who just won the Masters.
So what is my envy trying to tell me? Well, before we answer that question, if you're an ambitious professional whose envy sometimes gets the best of you, I see you. Maybe you're just trying to figure out what it is you want from your career and life more broadly. If that's you, we have a group coaching program over at radreads.co/coaching. Now here's my conversation on overcoming envy with Joe Hudson. I always buckle up for our conversations because I never know where they're going to take us. But for those listening and watching, there are a handful of other episodes on both Joe's podcast and on my podcast that really showcase the beauty and the complexity and also simplicity of your work. So maybe with that, give us how do you introduce yourself, Joe?
Hi, I'm Joe. Well, my story, which is what I think you're asking for, the short one, since probably many of your listeners have heard it before, is spent a tremendous amount of time in both business and in self-awareness pursuits, from meditation to breath work to 30 years now of both of those two things. So everything from being a venture capitalist, doing international stock lending for Barclays, working at BlackRock for a short period of time, and then now coaching folks, mostly people who are running companies or investors, mostly in Silicon Valley. Which is where I was a venture capitalist for 15 years.
How do you coaching? I coach. We there are a lot of coaches listening to this. How do you describe your style or philosophy or approach to coaching?
Yeah, if I'm talking to a potential client, it's not for everyone. But I'm lucky in that I haven't spoken to a potential client in a long time, and the fact that I have a waiting list now, and I'm very fortunate that way. But if someone's asking about how I do the work, I think about it as there's the head, the heart, and the gut, and most work is on one of those levels. So there's some emotional work that you can find out there. There's nervous system work you can find out there. There's head work that you can find out there, like intellectual deconstruction. And the work that I like doing is blending all three of those things. So in the head, it's very much being able to see through your thoughts and see through your identity, getting to what would be like a non-dual state. And in the heart, it would be emotional fluidity, which would be being able to love and accept all the emotional states that you have and have them flow through you without controlling you. And then the nervous system is your ability to accept pleasure and joy in your life. And that's the way that I think about measuring it, because you can't do that without safety. And what you start to learn is that so much of your actions are actually pushing away joy or happiness or peace or pleasure in particular. And so that's the way I describe it.
Got it. And then the gut, how would you describe that?
Oh, the gut's the nervous system.
Oh, the gut is the nervous system.
Yeah, and so it's the pleasure.
Got it.
If you can allow yourself to feel pleasure or joy, it means that you're safe. And so the nervous system is very much about fight or flight. Is it, are you safe? Are you not safe? Can you relax? Can you accept? Can you allow? Can you, as opposed to, I have to be diligent. I have to get things done. And it's some people would describe it as like the reptilian brain.
Yeah.
When the heart is more the mammalian brain because of the emotions that happens from mammals. However, neurologically speaking, I believe all three brains exist in most life forms, that are complex or
Yeah.
more complex. But yeah,
Got it. Well,
yeah,
we're gonna tap into all three of those, I
yes,
suspect, on today's question. So before we jump into the question, as you know, we have our own group coaching program. Joe has an amazing different master classes and coaching programs as well. And for ours, really aimed at people undergoing kind of significant career changes. And so there's these identity questions, there's financial questions, there's egoic questions. And so if you're interested in learning more about our coaching programs, check out radreads.co/coaching. So we're going to jump into today's question. How do you overcome envy? And
yeah,
maybe I'll start with a very personal example
yeah,
where I'll take myself. Oftentimes, I'm the
yeah,
study of self study in these conversations, and I might look at someone like you, and I look at you, and I look at the types of clients that you have. I look at the types of conversations that you have. I look at the type of accolades and success that you have.
yeah, yeah,
And, if you take a Venn diagram of, people that like Khe and people that like Joe, we can debate how overlapping or how non-overlap, but there's
right,
definitely some overlap
right,
there. And I know you, and I know that you're a beautiful, lovely human with just a heart of gold. And I say
yeah,
that in complete sincerity and earnestness.
yeah,
And there's still a part of me when I see you have a success that gets upset.
yeah.
And it gets
I just
upset.
want to say, like, how much closer I feel to you in the fact that you're saying that to me. Is that I'm like, it just actually kind of opens my heart oddly, just
Oh,
to let you know. Yeah.
oh, well, thank you. It's also very, I didn't actually think I was going to say this out of the jump. So I was going to obfuscate and be like, there are some people that do this. But I actually said the same thing with Paul Millard, who we know.
Yeah.
It's weird because I know that where I have utmost respect, we're not competitive. I don't really even think of what we do as competitiveness, but there's
Yeah.
this envy and jealousy that I have that's like, wow, like if I play my life forward, if I play my career forward, like Joe seems to, and from what I know, has put all these pieces together, whether it's the types of clients that you have or the combination of, like you said, the three brains,
Yeah.
or the way people admire you, like the way they talk about you in such an admiring voice, all of which I have tasted in all
Yeah.
different flavors myself.
Yeah.
But I'm like, why can't I just be happy for him? Why does Joe's success have to trigger something in me that intellectually, like, there's nothing, but
Right.
emotionally, one of the
Yeah.
brains, right? There's
Yeah.
something there. And so, and I know that this is a common, like, people see
Oh
it. I
yeah.
hear this often when someone sells a company, like,
Yeah.
the friend is like, yeah, I'm so happy for him, but now they have nine figures and I'm going to, some part of me
Right.
is like waiting for them to get divorced or like have high blood pressure or like something to justify that my
Yeah.
path, which is not the one I want, that I'm comparing myself to,
Yeah.
makes me feel okay.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot. There's so much to unpack there. So let's the first thing that comes to mind in it is there's this great saying. I think it's Buddhist, but I can't tell you exactly. I think maybe Tibetan, and it says, "If I think that I'm better than you, that's comparative mind, and that's misery. And if I think that I'm less than you, that's comparative mind, and that's misery. And if I think we're equals, that's comparative mind, and that's misery."
Ooh.
And it always struck me that it's not the better or worse. It's not the envy or see I'm like I got you or what either side. All of it's misery, and so it's literally the comparison that creates the pain in it more than anything else is what is one of the things that strikes me about it. However, I think there are some particular things around envy that are really interesting. Envy and jealousy, both. I noticed they're emotionally a push-pull. So most people are just listening to this, but if you can see me, I'm putting one hand out, which is like in a stop, and I have another hand that's like, come here, come here, come here. And that's what envy is, and jealousy. There's like both of those two things are happening. The stop is the only reason to really be envious is that you're doubting your own capacity. So like there's some doubt, there's some shame, there's some like not good enough piece, which is pushing whatever you want away from you. And at the same time, you're like, no, I want that. That'll make me happy if I get that. I want that thing. So it's a really interesting energy, and it seems to, for most people, it seems to keep the thing that they really want at bay, even if they get the things that they think they want. It keeps what they really want at bay. So that's another interesting trend in envy, typically. The other thing is that it's you asked at the beginning, how do we overcome it? And my response would be, overcoming it doesn't make any sense. It's learning how to listen to it. And so envy is pointing to something that you want. Right? Like you're not envious of, say, like, maybe you are, but I'm going to guess you're not envious of the guy who just won the Masters, and because it's like it's not where you're pursuing. It's not the thing that you're trying. You might be envious of the person who surfs really well because you are pursuing that. So there's something about the envy that's pointing directly to the thing that you want. And so learning how to listen to it, and the trying to get rid of it actually just makes it stronger. And we can go into any of this stuff in more detail, but it seems to solidify the resistance. And then and with that resistance, it's like, oh, I want it, but envy also, because it has that push pull, it's giving you the message that you can't have it. Right? Or you have to work really hard for it, right? There's something about like you have to change to get it, is part of the kind of the signal that gets distorted. And then the last piece about it that strikes me is that with envy, if it's unresisted, it changes into something very different. And it's more of a suppression of joy than it is a actual envy. And typically I see people with a lot of envy, they, not always, but often, pit against somebody at a young age. So it was like there was a lot of comparison in their childhood between like brother and sister. See how smart they are. Why aren't you more like da da da? So there's some way in which the parents usually try to motivate. If there's somebody who has a high propensity for envy, their parents tried to motivate them by comparing them to their siblings or to the kids down the hall. Why aren't you more like so-and-so, And so there's also that kind of trained thing of like, oh, I'm not allowed to feel good. It's that suppression of joy because why am I not more like so-and-so?
Yeah.
And so I think those are all the things that I see play with people when they're in envy.
Yeah. So I love that. You're right. I couldn't even tell you who won the Masters, but I hear he's of Tiger Woods ilk, based on some articles that I've read. Yeah. But you're right, is that it is very, I think it is very professional. I alluded to, venture capital and raising money or selling a company. And I might even go even more specific and we talked about this in a little bit in our last podcast, in somewhere like Wall Street, where it's such, the markers are so prescribed. And my wife she always kind of laughs at me when I'm like, oh, this friend, like you can kind of like ask a few questions, like, how big is their fund? What's their level in their fund? And like, oh, they could probably afford a $5 million house. She's like, right. How do you know that? I'm like, well, if you reverse into like carry and this, they probably take home, 1.2 a year, mortgage rates, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
something like in these fields where there's so many quantifiable markers, like what is what's the appeal of I feel like there's two things at play. There's one is like the appeal of like knowing your worth. And I know you're going
Yeah.
to dig right into this statement, but knowing your
Right.
worth based on a title, based on a bank balance, net worth statement, and so on.
Yeah.
And then there is this relative. So there's like an absolute worth, and then there's this relative worth of like where
Yeah.
you are relative to someone else. And
Yeah.
there's like there's like a beautiful view that it's like, well, you can look at that difference between where you are and where you want to be as like a source of motivation or a source of creative thinking or a source of inspiration. And then there's the optimist view, but then there's the cynical view that it's like you can just you can beat yourself up, you can throw rocks against that, you can self-justify that away.
Yeah.
And so like maybe like the starting question is like, why is it that there's a type of person that's so obsessed with a quantification element of their lives?
Yeah. So, yeah, it's a great question. Something that comes to mind. So, working with, you know, several billionaires, this is a great story because it shows how it never ends.
Yep.
So, several billionaires I know who started their own companies, who are billionaires in their because they own this big chunk of the company that they started, and the company has gotten really big. This is what they compare. They compare what percentage of the company they owned when it goes public.
Hmm.
That's
Wow.
because that's the comparative marker that they're in. It's not like how many billions I made. It's like
Yeah.
how much control did I get to keep in my company? What percentage did I have to
Wow.
sell to be successful? Right. So it's endless. They're like
Yeah.
the comparative mind and the envy. There's always someone over you. Like
Mhm.
Elon Musk. There's somebody over him, and if you, I mean, I remember hearing something. He's like, "Yeah, I'm not the richest guy in the world. It's like those Saudi sheiks or whatever." Like, so there's just like it's an endless
Yeah.
comparative
Yeah.
mind, and there's no end to it. So that's interesting in the fact that there's no holding good. I think as far as what makes people compare quantifiably is just if their mind is a very mind that likes to qualify stuff,
Yeah.
meaning that I've seen people at this is a blast from the past, but yeah, you can go to Burning Man as an example, and somebody can be like, I've been going to Burning Man for 16 years. Oh yeah, well, I've been going to Burning Man for 20 years, right? So it's like,
Mhm.
what the fuck's happening? Like, so it's really, but other folks will compare without quantify, like, oh, do you see how judgmental they are? Do you
Mhm.
see, oh, I'm not that judgmental, as they're judging the person for being more judgmental, right? Like, so,
Mhm.
and I remember this is kind of an off kilter story, but when I was like in the learning of so much, I brought and paid for 16 teachers of awakening to come together and sit together for 3 days in this conference center in Tennessee that was like beautiful river. It was like a retreat center more than a conference center. And I watched them compare their form of awakening, not all
Wow.
of them, but some of them compare their form of awakening with each other. It was like, it was an amazing thing to watch. I was like,
Wow.
wow. So we're even defining ourselves there. And I think that's where it usually stems, is that it's where we define ourselves by, how we
Mhm.
define ourselves. If we define ourselves or people are good because they're smart, then the comparison is going to be on intellect.
Yeah.
If it's I by how big your heart is, and how, my grandmother used to compare herself by how much she gave to the other grandmothers and how much they gave.
Mhm.
So it's like this, however you define yourself is where it's going to happen. And so if
Yeah.
you define yourself by money and financial success, then that's probably where the envy is going to show up.
Yeah. Is it part of our wiring that, like, if the person who's more awakened, if person A is 20% more awakened than person B, presumably person A will then feel some, like, I don't know if it's like dopamine or temporary sense of satisfaction, or is that what kind of like, maybe I'll give another example.
Yeah.
I was speaking with a friend, and we had been in the industry for a long time. This happens often, and someone will be like, yeah, I'm very public about how much money I've earned and saved and so on. And someone will say like, oh yeah, I have this much, and if the number is lower than I thought it would be, then like I feel great for a moment. And then if the number is higher than I thought I would be, I'm like, what the fuck?
Right.
And it actually happened the way when it feels good. It happened yesterday, and it's someone like, and I have a relationship with you. It's like it's just all love, but I'm like, God,
Right.
I felt this like internal superiority for like 12 hours because of
Right.
some stupid bank account number with like one of my closest friends. And I couldn't even brag about it to anyone because then you're an asshole. And
Right.
so I just like sat there by myself being like kind of happy. I'm like, what the
Right.
hell is wrong with me? I'm like, good thing I'm talking to Joe in 2 days.
Right. Well, so the part of the issue is the resistance to that, right? So
Mm,
it's the feeling a little guilty that keeps that in place. It's
mm,
the resistance to the fact that that's existing in you
yeah.
that keeps it in place. And so learning to love the part of you that is competitive, right?
Mhm.
My daughter, for instance, is super competitive, loves to win.
Yeah.
And the more she learns to love and accept that part of her, like I love
Mhm.
winning, the more it isn't about the other person and when she wins, and the more she can take joy in winning but not feel bad if the other
Yeah.
person wins. And so to
Yeah.
me that competitive nature is like it's a beautiful thing. It's like it's humanity. Like any tribe anywhere in the world,
Mhm.
any country, you'll see competition, and it's how that competition plays out and how
Yeah.
you hold yourself in it. Like, what's the stance you're taking towards yourself, towards the competition, that I feel is much more important than the competition itself. And so,
Mm.
my question back to you would be something to the effect of like, if you could love that part of yourself, like, oh, I love the fact that like I put out effort and I tried and I have seen that like it was successful. And the only way I
Mhm.
could do it is through a scoreboard, which is comparative by nature. Great. And I'm
Mhm.
like, yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Then what happens to the other person if you change? What happens to your view of the other person if you change your view of yourself? Would be the question that I
Yeah.
would.
Yeah. As you're saying it, I think you're one thing that I've realized, and I think you were saying this in the gut part of the three brains, is the ability to experience joy.
Yeah.
And so in some regards, like, there's like an arm's length relationship with that part, because it's like, don't get too proud because then you're an asshole, or don't
Right.
get to this or then you're a greedy bastard, or don't,
Right. But you're
it
also supposed to do it. But you're
yeah.
also supposed to do it. You're like, if I said to you
Mhm.
right now, I'm going to take away all the competitive spirit out of you, you'd be like, fuck no. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So you're supposed to do it, but you're bad for doing it. And
Yeah.
that's the push and pull. And that's the thing that creates the friction. And
Yeah.
when you fully accept it in yourself, then it softens. It's odd
Mm.
that that's how it works in general, but
Yeah.
as you fully accept the things that you think are unacceptable in yourself, it softens.
Yeah.
An example of this, I don't think I've said this here, but I remember I was sitting with a friend. He had done a lot of self work, and he's like, "Joe, you're a dick." And I was like, "What do you mean I'm a?" And he's like,
It's
"Ah, man, like don't fight it. Just love that you're a dick. You're a dick. It's no problem. I like that you're a dick. It's like you're a dick.
mm,
Just." And I was like, got off the defensive,ness, and I was like, yeah, like there's some benefit to this. Like Right. I say what I want to say. I don't worry too much about the repercussions. I'm everybody knows where I stand. And I just accepted, loved even the fact that, yeah, this is how I'm built. This is what, and in that loving of it over the next week or so, I just acted like less and less of a dick.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you think it's going to do the opposite. You think, oh, if I love this thing,
You do
then it's
more
going
of it.
to,
Yeah.
then you're going to get more of it. But it's just not how it works. And
Yeah.
yeah, so it's another piece.
It's funny as you said that. What would happen if you appreciated it or loved it?
Yeah.
Just for a split second, it just kind of dissolved. It just
Right.
like wasn't even a thing. It
Right.
just got like literally like like in the animations where it's, like a cup just turns into pixie dust.
Right.
It just lost its salience, which it's just kind of strange. It's just interesting just to notice that.
Right. I often, that's how like I see, though I feel, I allow the emotions and I love them, but there's a way in which I can see certain aspects of myself the way that I see a 3-year-old playing, like, oh, like how adorable. That's like that.
Mhm.
Oh, look, I'm competitive. That's adorable. That's great. Like not in a looking down upon way, not in like I'm better way, but just
Mhm.
in a like, oh, right, this is humanity. This is like, look how sweet that is. The other thing to
Yeah.
say about it, which is that if that comparative mind is happening somewhere else, it's also happening internally. If you weren't constantly comparing how you were doing, telling yourself you need to do better, you didn't do enough, or like if that voice wasn't happening inside of your head, then it wouldn't be happening externally.
Oh,
And
interesting.
that's an important thing to note, that we're just projecting our internal relationship with ourselves out in the world.
Mm. And so to paraphrase that, if you hold yourself to a high standard or are moving the goal lines on yourself, whether it's like, oh, like I went for a run today and I was like feeling sluggish.
Yeah.
And there were kind of like two parts of me that were starting to talk. One part is like, come on, suck it up. Don't be a little, don't be a wuss.
Right.
And then the other part was like, maybe you just don't feel like running today.
Right. Right. I
And
would
just like enjoy that it's a beautiful, sunny Southern California day. And like, who cares? Like, we're just happy to be outside. But
right.
I saw like, those two forces that were really at play. And I know I cut you off. I'll add one quick thing.
Yeah.
For me in the past, whether you can call it the taskmaster or the internal taskmaster or the inner critic or so on, in the past, I would have like been a savage to myself, being like,
Right.
if you don't turn this pace around, like nothing you want in life you'll never get anything you want in life. Like that's the
Right.
intensity. And I had
Right.
that for 2 decades. I mean, and
Right.
so to know that even the thought crossed my mind that's like, what if we just enjoyed this
Right.
sunny day? I was like, whoa, you've come a long
The
way.
way. That's yeah.
But I
So
cut you off on that.
I don't think it's, you said it. I would say that that kind of envy doesn't happen because you're want to perform. I love performing. You have ambition. I have a huge amount of ambition.
Mhm.
It is the self-abuse. It is
Yeah.
the, if you don't do this, you're going to do this. You have to do this. Why aren't you doing this? Why don't you try harder? It's that part which often slows down performance. But
Mhm.
outside of that, it's that creates a ton of the envy. It's
Got
because
it.
that's the relationship you're having with yourself. You're like comparing the way that you want to be with the way that you should be and the way that you are. And there's like this constant comparative mind going on internally between those things. And so then that's what happens externally. But you can be a
Mm.
high performer and super ambitious and not have that mind, not have
Yeah.
that internal negative dialogue.
Um, say more on that.
Yeah. So let me give you I think as Malcolm Gladwell talks about this thing, and I love this. He basically talks about how you should not send your kids to the top engineering school. And the reason is that if you go to the mid-level engineering school and you look at the kids, a third of them become engineers. The top third, like most of them, some 60% become engineers. The middle third, you know, it's something like 40% become engineers. The bottom third, it's like 10% become engineers.
Okay.
And you take that same thing to Stanford, and it's the exact same numbers. So if you want your kids to become an engineer, make sure they're at the top tier of the school that they attend. And the thought process there is that our comparative mind really only works locally. And so it's just like what you see and what you know. And so you don't know like the world of making $1 billion company. So you don't know the thing to compare is like the percentage of ownership of the company upon IPO. Right? But if you live in a place where there's a whole bunch of people with mansions, your mind starts doing comparative mind thing with like, do I have as much of that as them? But if you own the biggest house in the smallest neighborhood and a neighborhood full of small houses, so it's an interesting thing that we have this idea that if we beat ourselves up, it's going to motivate us. And for a few people, that it works pretty well. It's just not really very efficient fuel. It's just it just creates a lot of dirt. But for most of us, it just doesn't work well at all. And people listening to your podcast, it probably worked well for a while, and then they burnt out, and then it stopped working.
Yes, that's exactly where they are.
Yeah, and because of that, many people, when they transition out of that kind of a job, they're going to spend a couple years in pajamas, right? And then they'll be beating themselves up that they're not doing enough, but their system is so exhausted that there's not a lot that they can do.
Yeah.
So the cleaner fuel isn't self-abuse. It's the same kind of cleaner fuel that you would get from a great coach, which is, hey, you can do this. I have faith in you. I believe that you can do it. Like, do you want to push harder? Let's do this. Let's go. Like motivation and excitement. It isn't abuse.
Yeah.
And, you know, and if you read the books of like the famous coaches that are actually effective, I mean, there's some who yell at their folks. They don't typically, but if you look at the Lakers coach, etc., they'll talk about the psychology of this, and that it's like, there is a time to say, hey, come on, like, pick up the pace, but there's not abusing somebody just teaches them that they're not good enough, that there's something wrong with them. And that does not typically motivate people to perform well.
Yeah. I feel like people, I've had this conversation with many of our listeners who, you know, I would say that there's a lot, like having just met so many folks over the years, that there's a lot of, I mean, if I just had to generalize a pattern, there are a lot of people who struggled to be seen when they were kids, usually men. And from that lack of being seen, they couldn't be seen in traditional ways, like maybe they looked good, or they were handsome, or they played football, or they kind of the more traditional markers. And so they then were like, well, I can be seen by like my intellect, by my entrepreneurial skills, by my investing skills. And they just went so hard on that skill. And then at some point it flips where it's like, you know, like the prom king peaked too early, right? All the memes of like, you know, now they're sitting in their mom's basement or what have you, with like a beer belly. So this other group, but they've been motivated with this kind of unhealthy fuel source. It's like, I'm not seen, a lot of like self-abuse and negative self-talk, but it's paying dividends, like you said, because they are leapfrogging folks, because this fuel is like, it's like radioactive in some regards. But
they're leapfrogging some folks for sure. But I think the thing that people
in the quantifiable space, not as holistic humans,
right? For sure. But if you take a look at, this is the way I explain. A huge amount of people think that if they give up the self-abusive voice in their head, they won't be motivated. And I always do this with them. I will say, okay, so I want you to just like write down an essay for me, 3 paragraphs of why you deserve a job or something, and they'll start writing, and I'll be like, oh, you're holding the pen too tight, that you're not doing that right. Why are you writing it like that? Like, your cursive isn't any good. You could do better. I swear you could do better. You could write better than this. And within 30 seconds, a minute of this, they realize like that this is not making them perform well. So like, what the fuck? If that doesn't make you perform well, why would doing it to yourself make you perform well?
Yeah.
And everybody knows flow states, and they know how well they perform in flow states. And one of the things about flow states is that that voice shuts up.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so yeah, there's it doesn't really actually make us perform well. I think what it can do is it allows us to perform unholistically.
Yep. Yeah.
So you can do one thing, and really drill yourself into that one little specialization like an insect, but it doesn't actually allow for great holistic performance.
Can I ask, this is maybe like a somewhat generalized question.
Yeah.
If you take this pattern, I've been thinking a lot about these like very driven people with the unhealthy fuel source.
Yeah.
It seems like, because you could have these, sometimes these very driven people have an unhealthy fuel source and a very, very dark side of,
Yes.
different substance abuse, whatever.
Yes.
Many dark shadow sides of it.
Yes.
But oftentimes, the visible part that they can be seen projected onto society is actually something that society as writ large rewards.
Yes,
like,
correct.
Oh, you're so successful, you're so rich, you're so smart, you're so charming, you're so charismatic. And you and I and the listeners have been in enough rooms to know that someone who is smart, charming, charismatic, and rich can have a very dark side that they just hide and only comes up for very special occasions in public.
Yeah.
Is there something, but I guess my question is like, do you think that society tends to reward or turn a blind eye to that certain type of person who happens to be like very much this podcast listener? And that kind of exacerbates the cycle of it? This is more like a societal question.
I mean, I can go down to the local, there's a place near me that does coffee, and it's like where all the stoners hang out, and it just perpetuates itself. I feel like whatever culture perpetuates itself. There's enough people who hate the charming, shining tooth, charismatic, intelligent guy in the nice suit. There's a whole portion of society that does not like that at all. And so the more important part about that, the thing about that's happening there is there's a deep shame of who they are. That is the cause of that darkness and the cause of the cover up. It's the cause of the avoidance. It's the cause of I have to put on a mask to be here with you all. And this is what I'm not going to show you this side of me, because they feel like that side of them is bad. And that one kills performance, because like that takes a lot of energy that's not going into your ambition, but also it perpetuates it. It just the same way we talked about how being upset with the envy, resisting the envy creates the envy. It is that shame that creates the bad habits that they're ashamed of in the first place. And so, and I think that this is one of the nuances, is that when people decide, hey, I'm going to actually confront that part of myself that is hidden in the darkness that I don't want other people to see, and I'm going to learn to love it, and I'm going to be there with it, they aren't productive for a while. Some of the times it's like there's not a lot of productivity that comes as they're confronting that, because their energy is going into healing and fixing that thing, instead of running the better marathon or creating the bigger hedge fund. My experience in the people that I coach is, if you have a really good guide, you can do that without a huge amount of energy that if you don't have a guide in doing it. But the second piece that I think is critical is when that has sloughed off, when that piece is there and you don't have that hidden shame and you're actually loving all the parts of yourself, then your ambition can really, one, become a lot more aligned with who you are as a person, but B, you're far more effective.
Yeah.
And
If
it's
I'm
really hard for people to see it because it's like working out. Like, I worked out, I don't feel good the next day. Why am I working out? Because you feel good over the long run. It's the same thing.
yeah. You know, you reminded me of an experience that I had that I think Lou's probably ties into all of this. But I did some IFS work, so I did coach internal family systems for
Great
the
stuff.
listeners who aren't familiar. But I'm hearing in the things you're describing, like you talk, there are different parts, and so there's probably some overlap in the language you're using to the internal family systems language. And so I was in this coaching session, and there was this part that I was speaking to, and it was a very driven part, very, this competitive part,
Yeah.
taskmaster, just high energy, high intensity. And then the coach asked me, well, what does that part say? And the part said, I'm tired. I'm just so tired. And if I think back intellectually, that part has been on overdrive since I was like 6. Like I was always been hustling since I was a little kid. So it's just saying it's tired.
Yeah.
And then the coach asked, what does that part need? And I said, it just needs to be thanked. And I just burst into tears right after that.
Yeah.
And I don't cry much. So that shows the depth of that. Just like two simple, I mean, it had taken a while to get to that point, but two questions.
Yeah. Yep.
And this was about 4 weeks ago, maybe 5 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I think to your point, like I have just lost so much energy since that moment. And I think at first I was trying to like just get back to the old state. I'm like, how am I so unmotivated or so distracted? But very quickly I was like, no. And I think thanks to this coach, I was just let it unfold. And there's the skeptical part of me, and I'm sure some of the listeners are like, come on, you're like really exaggerating this story. Like 2 questions couldn't have done that. But
no, it absolutely could. Yeah.
I was so, and still, and like I hadn't drank for a long time. And then all I wanted to do was drink to like rebalance things. And I started sleeping so hard. And so it was just, as you said, you're like, you were using the analogy of, we were talking about the thing that you're repressing. We were talking about shame or alluding to shame. But yeah, I felt that like physical rebalancing. And to be honest, I'm still kind of in it. I don't really know where it's going, but I that's how it's connected to the run today, where I'm like, yeah, you just don't need to. It's probably why I was so tired to begin with, and then why I decided not to push myself. So I didn't have a question there, but I
have some comments though, if you want them. Yeah.
Yes.
So one is that big shifts like that require a lot of sleep to integrate. So that's one of the things. And then typically what happens is when a piece like that gets seen through, and then, oh, I can rest now. Then the thing it was protecting shows up, which is the part of you that like has that shame. And the shame requires the same tenderness that the taskmaster did.
Yeah.
Right. So the taskmaster was to prove that you weren't bad, that you were good. Now the taskmaster is gone. So you're confronted with that part of yourself that apparently somebody taught you wasn't good. But it was just great. It was just not, I mean, knowing your background a little bit, it was just not something that your parents' fear that you needed to be financially okay could accept. That you can't be that way if you're going to be financially successful. And so that part of you now gets to come out and get loved. And then your holistic ambition shows up.
Yeah.
It's not the ambition of, oh, I have to make money to to survive. It's not it's the ambition of like your purpose.
Yeah.
Like what's your purpose here?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then when you're in your purpose, man, energy is endless. I
Yeah.
mean, if you look at how I work
Mhm.
like people are dumbfounded by how I work and how much I can produce. But it's
Yeah.
not me. It's because I feel like I am deeply in my purpose.
Yeah.
And I can't
Yeah.
imagine doing anything else.
Yeah. No, it's beautiful. And yeah, I've had a taste of it, because in that part, I haven't spent as much time with the part that was kind of buried below the
Yeah.
taskmaster. But what I have kind of noticed, and is some of it is with this coach, some of it is just on my own, is that
Yeah.
there's these parts of like of love and of creativity and of joy that are just, they're like,
Yeah.
wait, now we can, like, there's room for us to hang out here. Like,
Exactly. Totally.
and I'm like, wow, what a crazy thought that like the taskmaster took up so much energy and space
Yeah.
that all the other stuff was just like relegated to the fringes, right? Creativity is like like you stay in this little
Yeah.
corner of the room, right? Because
Yeah.
we got this, right?
Right.
Love, you
It's-
stay at this side because like we don't
Right.
really need you, but like just in case, like be ready, be on standby, right?
Right.
And it's like it's weird to see that, like, I don't even, like I said, I don't know I don't know where the new equilibrium finds itself, or maybe that's not even the right metaphor. Maybe equilibrium is not the metaphor to be used. Who know? I
Yeah.
don't know yet.
Yeah.
But it's been pretty remarkable.
Yeah. It's a beautiful thing. And so, like, even to point it out further, you've been on the journey for a while of self-discovery. You
Mhm.
left your business and the business world and created this thing and everything. Even this podcast that we're doing, you're like, here's a way for me to do some self-discovery. And you're talking to me about what's going on with you right now. Like, you're committed to this journey.
Mhm.
Did you need a taskmaster to show up and have this podcast with me? Right? Or okay, you have to be vulnerable here and you have to ask
Mhm.
questions that get you ahead in your journey of transformation. But
Yeah.
it's an ambition that is so strong that
Yeah.
half of the viewers, when they heard you start off like that with me, would be like, I would never fucking say that. It requires that level of ambition to do it.
Yeah.
And you're doing it, but without the taskmaster.
Yeah.
But it's often hard for us to see that until
Yeah.
the taskmaster fades away a bit.
I think you're spot on. And I would take it a step even further, is that, I was, normally I don't try to schedule things right before an interview, but I was on another call like 2 minutes before. So I didn't even have time to prepare.
Right.
I was just like, I'm just gonna wing it. And I think you're on something, because the taskmaster, I would, listening to you talk about the taskmaster, I'd be like, well, I'm committed to 52 consecutive episodes. I've written a newsletter for 500 straight weeks. So like there's still a part of me, but and some of it is up for debate, so to speak. I'm like, oh, are
Right.
you doing the thing just because you did it 500 times, so you need to do it 100 more times? Or are you
Right.
doing this thing because it is aligned with it is a part of you holistically? But
Yeah.
I will say one of the I think some of the
So
list.
wait, let me stop for just a second.
Yeah,
Do you actually have a choice? I mean,
I
if
actually
I
have a
said,
choice.
okay, can you choose to stop doing self-discovery?
No, absolutely not.
Right. No taskmaster needed.
Yeah.
There's no choice in it. Now, whether you do it in a podcast or whether you don't do it in a podcast, whatever, but the
Yeah.
ambition is there.
Yeah.
And when you find that thing that you don't have choice in, man, we're performers.
Ooh,
That's when we
wow.
perform.
When you find that thing, can you explain? I think I know
Yeah,
what you mean,
I
but
will.
can you
I
explain
can
that more?
explain that perfectly.
Yeah.
This is such a great story. Love this story. Just happened recently. So we're at the finish. We're done with our groundbreakers. Our groundbreakers is like the off menu retreat. Like high powered folks come together and they do 7 days. It's intense. We work. There's like 12 participants, 4 people looking after them, And we work from 7:30 in the morning till 10:30 at night, 7 days. And it's emotional and it's big and it's heavy and lovely and wonderful and loving, but it's intense. Tara and I, my wife and I, are at the end of this, and we're sitting in the hot tub. We are exhausted. And we talked about this moment in time. We were about a trade that we could have made that would put like we would have $50 million more than we have right now if we would have made this trade. And I was saying how I was like, I'm kind of grateful that didn't happen. And she's like, what do you mean? I was like, well, I know that we would make it as a marriage with that money because we had already done that work, but I'm not sure if we would have ever started this business.
Yeah.
And she's like, yeah. And I said, okay, scenario. If somebody offered us $2 billion or $1 billion to buy the business, but there was a non-compete clause in it that said we could never do this kind of work again, would you sell it? And both of us had the exact same emotional expression and response. We both went, fuck. Yeah. No, we wouldn't. Right. So we both thought about it. We both realized that we wouldn't do it. And we were both like a little disappointed that we wouldn't do it because that'd be nice, but we know we couldn't. Yeah. And so we both like, no, we would not sell the company for $1 billion.
Yeah.
And I came home and I told my daughters about this story. Told them the exact story I just told you. And 2-3 days later, my 15-year-old said, I've been thinking about what my $1 billion idea is. And I was like, oh, you want to make $1 billion? She goes, no, I want an idea that I wouldn't sell for $1 billion.
Oh, wow.
And that's when you're living a choiceless life. Like, this is my purpose. This is what I'm here to do. I couldn't sell it.
How old is your daughter?
She's 15. 15.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. And she's the super competitive one. Right? She's the one who loves winning. She's the one that comes home and she's like, I have a 97 and I need it to be a 98% in that class. Like, she is super competitive. And
wow.
Both are there.
I love that. Well, Joe, I think that there's no better way to end a podcast than with that. So, as always, I mean, like I said, the conversations with you are truly a gift, and you are such a unique, special kind. So many adjectives to describe you.
Thank you.
And I'm always just honored that A, we get to spend this time together, and then our listeners get to know you and you more and more with each go around. So tell our listeners where they can go, learn more about you. We'll put it all in the notes.
I'm on Twitter at FU Joe Hudson. Remember I said I was a dick. FU Joe Hudson. The podcast is the way to go into depth with us. So Art of Accomplishment
podcast is amazing.
And then we have courses that you can sign up for. But I would suggest listening to the podcast first and seeing if the course is right for you. And I get to see you in person in just a couple of weeks.
2 weeks.
I'm really looking forward to it.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Joe. This has been so awesome.